Good evening, and once more we're now not going to discuss our introduction to the Orthodox faith. I want to answer one and at a time two questions which have been submitted by viewers. One is about the recent Islamic victory over Maclean's magazine at a hearing before the Human Rights Tribunal, and the other one is about witchcraft and magic. And whether or not the priests in the Old Testament did magic and stuff too. So I'm going to start with answering the question about the Human Rights Tribunal. The writer asked me why the Islamic community could get a ruling that the Maclean's magazine article, which discussed Islam, was hate propaganda, or at least why it infringed their rights, and why sometimes Christians seem to lose their rights. Let's stop and think about, I know which case you're talking about with the Christian group, and I need to discuss this a little bit. When Islam takes the human rights exception to something that had been published or said, the basis of their complaint is not that they have been deprived of the right to attack someone else, but that something has been presented which might incite hatred toward Islamic peoples living in whichever country, Canada in this case. And of course, sometimes the reaction is quite violent, and I'll risk saying sometimes irrational, as for example when there was a cartoon of Muhammad which appeared in a newspaper in Denmark. But Islamic culture is so radically different from Western culture that we have to take into account their particular sensitivities when they explode or make one of these protests. However, in this given case, the Islamic community, or a group of Islamic organizations, lobbied against an article which had appeared in Maclean's magazine, which they said defamed Islam and could generate anger or hatred towards the Islamic community. Now, whether one agrees with that or not, or whether one thinks that's an infringement of freedom of the press, or freedom of expression, nevertheless, the court agreed with the Islamic communities. When they approached this Human Rights Tribunal, they were talking about an attack upon their religion. Very often, when some Christian communities in Canada have claimed that their rights were being impinged, it was because they were restricted from attacking another community. They were not defending themselves against an attack against their religion or against their community, likely to incite hatred against Christianity. They were complaining that they were curtailed from impinging upon other people's right to be. The question about whether a Christian group could go into a public park, commandeer a portion of it in a picnic area with a loudspeaker, give gospel sermons, preach to people, or really harangue people, call them all dirty sinners or whatever, and pass out leaflets to anybody who happened to come through the park. To say that they could not do that was certainly not impinging upon the freedom of their religion. It was protecting innocent citizens who wanted to go and enjoy the peacefulness and the retreat of the park without being harassed, without having to listen to a loudspeaker blaring away, playing gospel music and listening to a preacher, as they usually do, yell, scream, and harangue. And this was not a case where anybody's religious freedom was being hindered, nor did the tribunal in any way impinge the religion or incite hatred toward that religion. As a matter of fact, allowing them to go to the park and set up loudspeakers in a picnic area and disturb everyone's peace, keep them from the peaceful enjoyment of a public space, and try to flog little leaflets and things on them, that would have been far more likely to incite hatred against Christianity than not allowing them to speak in the park. When a Christian group releases a video for public showing and distributes it widely, trying to denigrate and castigate the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, are they then inciting hatred toward the Mormon religion and toward Mormon people? That's an interesting question. We could say, well, of course, we think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is wrong. What they're teaching is wrong. Even some of the aspects of their way of life are wrong from our point of view. But to make public movies distributed widely among the public attacking the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in a way likely to incite a hatred toward them, this is another question. So you see, very often the rights that evangelical Christians are demanding are not the right to live freely and peacefully and practice their religion freely and peacefully without hatred being raised up against it. What they're asking for is the right to attack other people and actually very often incite hatred toward other people. That is the difference between the Muslim approach to the courts, the human rights tribunals, and some of the Protestant approach to the human rights tribunals that we've seen. Almost always fundamentalist or evangelical Protestants. Anytime one of these particular Christian groups is deprived of the right to attack, slander, malign, castigate, or raise hatred toward another group, they claim their human rights have been impinged upon and that the right to practice their religion has been impinged upon. When Islam goes to a human rights court in Canada, a human rights tribunal, they are not challenging any restrictions on their ability to attack others or to castigate others. They're premising their case on the fact that something has been said, published, or written about Islam which might arouse anger or hatred toward Islam and the Islamic communities in Canada. So this is the difference, and this is what is happening. And we shouldn't pretend otherwise, because this is precisely it. If these Christian groups were to say, look, this publication, this pamphlet, this writing in the magazine or the newspaper, this book by Dawkins or whatever, is inspiring hatred toward our community, they would perhaps get a different hearing in a human rights tribunal. But when you go and say that our right to attack and castigate somebody else has been impinged, you're not going to win any case in a human rights tribunal. It isn't going to happen, because you're the one who's violating human rights, not the people who are trying to prevent you from spreading hatred about them. And so I'm surprised that the Mormons haven't taken that to a human rights tribunal yet. That was one of the cases, by the way, that was brought up in the human rights tribunal. So that's the answer to one of the questions, and of course we're out of time, so we'll have to come back to witchcraft and magic at a later time. Thank you, and God bless you all, and please remember us in your prayers.